Welcome back to another episode of Easy Education. I'm Easy to Chris, and I'm hoping to make education easy for you. Today, we are going to be starting a series, and we're going to be moving the podcast in a little bit of a different direction where we're actually going to be showing you practical ways of learning. And I'm excited because this first series that we're going to focus on will be something that I've kind of been talking about over the last few weeks and something that I'm really excited about, but also something that I need a little bit more help with being able to communicate with people in my peer group. So today we're going to start a series on photography. So Atlas, what is it that we're actually going to be doing over the next couple of weeks?
All right, so here's the deal. You've got a genuinely good eye. Your gallery work proves it. You make these choices on instinct, and instinct doesn't have words. You freeze a bird mid-flight, you blur a waterfall, you find symmetry in a city park, and you know it works, but you can't quite explain why it works or what you're actually doing with the camera to make it happen. So this series is about handing you the vocabulary and the mechanism behind what you're already doing. We're going to take the 5 foundational concepts: shutter speed, aperture, ISO, composition structure, and light, and we're going to build them one at a time, one episode each. But here's the thing, we're not memorizing facts. We're naming things you already know, and every week you're going to leave with homework that proves the concept to you in a real photograph. The audience gets to watch you discover you already knew this stuff. That's the whole point. So today we're starting with shutter speed, the simplest concept and the one closest to what you do with wildlife. By the end of the episode, you're going to walk away knowing exactly what shutter speed is, why it matters, and what to do with it. Sound good?
It sounds great. Let's get started.
Yeah, so before we get into the lesson, let me ask you something practical first. When you're out shooting wildlife, and I'm talking about your gallery work, birds in flight, that kind of thing, what's going through your head when you're trying to capture a bird mid-motion? Like, are you thinking about settings on the camera, or are you just pointing and shooting, or is it something else entirely?
You know, it's actually something else entirely. I started really putting aperture as my primary focus, and I've never really looked at shutter speed. So I am genuinely not that good at getting birds in flight and birds in motion. Most of what it is that I'm doing are trying to find birds in moments of stillness because I know I can capture them. I've got um, one of the pictures in the gallery is of a dragonfly, and I wish that I could capture a dragonfly in flight, but I was waiting for it to bask in the sun and let the heat just kind of warm up its wings, and I had a great 5 seconds to capture it while it was still. And that's typically where I'm focusing on, is more still life. So I kind of understand the concepts of shutter, but I don't really know when is the appropriate time to use it and when would changing my shutter speed degrade the quality of the photo.
Okay, so you've been leaning hard into aperture, which makes sense because aperture is loud and shutter speed is quieter until you need it. But here's the thing, you're actually using shutter speed already. You just don't know you're using it. Every time you wait for that dragonfly to stop, you're making a shutter speed choice. You're choosing a fast shutter so you can freeze the moment without blur. But here's where it gets interesting. You said you're not that good at birds in flight because you haven't looked at shutter speed. So let me ask you this. When you try to shoot a bird that's actually moving, not basking, actually flying, what happens to the photo? Does it come out blurry? Does it come out dark? Does the autofocus lose it? What's the actual problem you hit?
Typically, the autofocus loses it, and I have a hard time maintaining the manual focus distance to be able to get a sharp image. A lot of the times It's just a little bit blurry, and it's not something that I feel is worth sharing.
All right, so autofocus is hunting, and you're losing the moment. That's a separate beast. We'll circle back to that another time. But here's what I want to focus on right now. When you do get a shot and it's blurry, is that blur across the whole bird or is it just the wings?
Usually it's across the whole bird.
Yeah, okay. So the whole bird is soft. That's motion blur. The bird moved while the shutter was open, and the camera caught the movement as blur instead of freezing it. That's shutter speed talking directly to you right now. Here's the fundamental thing. Shutter speed is how long the sensor stays open and collecting light. A fast shutter, like 1,000th of a second, opens and closes so quick that even a flying bird looks frozen. A slow shutter, like half a second, stays open long enough that anything moving turns into a blur streak. So when your bird comes out blurry across the whole frame, what you actually need is a faster shutter speed. Close that window quicker so the bird doesn't have time to move much while you're collecting the image. But here's the trade-off. And this is where shutter speed gets interesting. A faster shutter lets a less light in because the sensor is only open for a blink. So you're choosing between freezing motion and having enough light to actually see what you froze. That's the game. Does that land so far?
Yeah, so is that where I would need to increase the ISO to allow more light to come in? And then I am able to have the shutter speed fast enough where I'm getting both light and speed to get a crisp in view image.
All right, yeah, that's a really good instinct. And you're already thinking like a photographer. But that's actually aperture and ISO territory. And we've got dedicated episodes for both of those. Right now, I want to keep you locked on shutter speed so the concept doesn't get muddy. Here's the thing though, you just named the actual problem you're hitting. You want a fast shutter to freeze the bird, but a fast shutter needs more light to work. So you're stuck, freeze the motion, or get enough light. That tension is real, and it's exactly why aperture and ISO exist. But shutter speed is the first domino. You have to understand what it does before you can solve the light problem with the other two levers. So stay with me here. When you're shooting that dragonfly in the sun, waiting for stillness, what shutter speed do you think you're actually using? And I'm not looking for a number. I'm looking for fast or slow, quick or long.
Typically, it's a slower shutter speed because it's not moving and I'm able to get exactly the image that I want.
All right, hold on. I want to push back gently here because I don't think that's actually what's happening. You're in bright sunlight shooting a still dragonfly. Your camera is trying to get a good exposure in all that light, so it's going to naturally choose a faster shutter speed to avoid overexposing. You're not choosing slow. The light is forcing fast on you. Here's the actual thing. When there's lots of light, your shutter has to be faster, or the image gets blown out white. When there's low light, your shutter can be slower because there's less light coming in. So sunlight is actually pushing you toward the fast shutter. You need to freeze motion, which is why bright daylight is the easiest time to shoot moving subjects. So let me reframe the question. When you're waiting for that dragonfly to sit still in the sun, do you feel like you're fighting the camera for exposure, or does the exposure just work?
No, the exposure just works.
There it is. That's because the sun is doing the heavy lifting. You've got so much light that the camera naturally picks a fast shutter to keep from blowing out, and that fast shutter is what freezes the dragonfly. You're not choosing slow. The light is choosing fast for you. And that's why stillness plus sunlight equals a sharp image. Now flip it. Imagine that same dragonfly, but it's in shade instead of direct sun. Same dragonfly, same stillness. What do you think changes about your exposure?
It needs to be slower to, or yeah, it needs to be slower in order to allow more light to come in.
Exactly. In shade, there's less light, so the shutter has to stay open longer to collect enough light for a good exposure. And here's where it gets real. If that dragonfly suddenly took off and flew while you were in that shade with a slow shutter, what would happen to the image?
I would get motion blur from the dragonfly moving because the shutter is still open.
Bingo. That's the whole concept right there. Shutter speed is the weapon you use against motion. Fast shutter freezes it, slow shutter lets it blur, and the trade-off is light. A fast shutter needs more light to work, a slow shutter can work in dim conditions, but it'll catch movement as blur. So now I want to put you in a real scenario and make you actually choose. You're at a river at golden hour. Soft light, not bright sun. You see two things you want to shoot. One, a heron standing still in the shallows. Two, the water moving over the rocks behind it. What shutter speed do you pick and why? And what are you sacrificing to get what you want?
I would probably choose a shutter speed that is open for either a full second or 2 seconds, hoping that the heron doesn't move whatsoever, because that would give me a crisp image of the heron while it shows movement in the water around it.
Okay, so you're going slow to blur the water and keep the heron sharp. That's a creative choice, and it's exactly right for the feeling you want. But here's where I need to push. If the heron moves even slightly during those 1 to 2 seconds the shutter's open, what happens to the heron?
It ruins the shot.
Exactly. You're betting everything on the heron staying completely still for a full second or two. That's a high wire act, one tail flick, one head turn, and the whole image is ruined because the shutter was open the entire time. So here's the real question. If you want the water blurred and the heron sharp, but you can't bet on the heron staying motionless for 2 seconds, what other option do you have? Think about the other levers we haven't talked about yet, the things that control how much light comes in besides shutter speed.
I could probably I could speed up the shutter to half a second, which will still show the movement of the water momentarily, and it'll have a soft blur to it, whereas the likelihood of the heron being in focus is more clear, or more likely rather. The other option that I can do is, if I'm on a tripod, I would be able to do one shot as 1/1000th of a second and be able to get the heron in focus, and then do a second shot once the heron leaves, holding the shutter open for 2 seconds to get the blur that I want, and then create a composite image of the heron clear in front of the water moving.
Yeah, all right. So you've got two instincts here, and they're both legitimate. The first one, half a second instead of two, is smart risk management. You get some motion blur in the water, but you're not gambling the whole shot on the heron's stillness. That's a real trade. The second one, shooting 2 frames and compositing, that's advanced technique, and it works, but it's past where we're trying to go right now. That's post-production and layering, not shutter speed fundamentals. But here's the thing I want you to feel. You naturally reached for the half-second compromise because you understood the problem. You didn't need me to explain it. You know that fast shutter freezes, slow shutter blurs, and somewhere in between is a choice you can make. That's shutter speed. That's the whole concept. Now let me ask you one more scenario, because I want to lock this down. Imagine you're shooting that heron from a tripod and you want the water silky smooth, like glass, no texture at all. What shutter speed would you need, and what's the problem you'd hit?
I would probably have 1/1000th of a second, like a very high speed, so that way it's entirely glossy. and everything is crisp and clear. But at that point, I would need a lot more light. So if it's golden hour and I have soft lighting, I need to increase either my exposure or my ISO to be able to compensate for what the lighting is around me.
Hold on, I want to catch you there because you just said something backwards, and it matters. You said 1,000th of a second to get silky smooth water, but 1,000th of a second is fast. That freezes motion. Fast shutter equals frozen water droplets, texture, crisp detail. That's the opposite of silky and glossy. For silky smooth water, that glass effect, you actually need the shutter wide open, held open for seconds. That's a slow shutter. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds even. The longer it stays open, the more the water blurs into that creamy smooth look. And yeah, when you go that slow in golden hour light, you run into the problem you named. Too much light, image gets blown out white. That's where ND filters live, or shooting in shade, or waiting until dusk. But that's exposure management, which is aperture and ISO territory. Right now, just lock this. Slow shutter, il motion blur, il silky water. Fast shutter, il's frozen motion, il's texture and detail. Does that distinction land?
It does, but how would I be able to get glassy, silky water while also being able to get a crisp heron if my shutter is open for 5 seconds? I feel like that is compromising the potential of that shot being successful because more than likely that heron is going to move.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can't. That's the hard truth of shutter speed. You have to choose. Silky water or sharp heron. You can't have both with a single exposure when the heron is alive and might move. That's why you instinctively reached for the composite idea earlier. Shoot the heron sharp with a fast shutter, then shoot the water blurred with a slow shutter, and layer them together in post. That's the workaround. But in a single shot, you're making a trade. So the real question becomes, what matters more for this particular image? The crisp heron or the silky water? Because shutter speed forces that choice on you. And there's no both answer. That's the actual power of understanding shutter speed. You're not just twisting a dial. You're making a creative decision about what you want the image to say. And once you understand what each choice does, you pick deliberately instead of guessing. So before we wrap up, I want to give you the homework that's going to cement this all week. We're going to shoot one moving subject twice. Once frozen, once blurred. Same subject, two extremes, side by side. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right, so here's what we're doing. We talked about shooting running water with a still focal point in the foreground. A rock, a log, something that doesn't move. You shoot it twice. Once with a fast shutter so the water looks crisp and textured, individual droplets frozen midair. Then you shoot the same scene with a slow shutter so the water turns silky and smooth like glass. Same composition, same light, same everything. Just the shutter speed changes between the two frames. When you look back at them side by side, the difference is going to be undeniable. You're going to see shutter speed doing its job right there in front of you. Practical notes. For the frozen frame, shoot in any light. Bright sun, shade, doesn't matter. For the silky frame, shoot it in soft light. Overcast, open shade, or near dusk, so the image doesn't blow out white while the shutter's open. You've got the Ulanzi tripod, so lock the composition down and just change the shutter speed between shots. Pick your water this week, shoot both versions, and bring them back next time. We're going to look at what you learned. Sound good?
It sounds great, and I love the idea of being able to get practical homework in between these episodes so that way I can be able to put these instincts and concepts into practice and be able to kind of tie everything together.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. You're not learning shutter speed from me talking at you. You're learning it from your own photographs, proving it to you. That's the whole deal. All right, so before we wrap, anything else you wanted to touch on tonight before we head into your outro?
No, although I do want to say I'm kind of excited with the art gallery. I actually sold my first print this week. It was a bee on lavender, and it's a probably one of my favorite pictures. It's in the gallery, and I was really excited that it took less than a week for the first one to sell. So I will probably be going in later today to enter in a few of the prints into the state fair that should be happening in the fall, because my wife has been bugging me for years to make that happen. So I've been really encouraged with actually being able to show my photography in public, that now I want to do it a little bit more, and kind of move more into this space, being a little bit more serious about it.
That's solid. You sold a print in less than a week. That's not luck, that's people seeing something real in your work. And now you're entering the state fair. That's the pattern we've talked about playing out in real time. You do the work, you put it in front of people. Reality catches up to what you already knew about yourself. Good luck at the fair. Now go do your outro.
Well, that's the first episode in a series on photography. And like I said, we're going to be doing a couple different series moving forward. So right now it's on photography. I think the next one might be on something a little bit more personally interesting to me. But if you guys enjoy what it is that we're doing here, and you want to be able to understand how to be able to use AI to better educate yourself, and not just use it as a cheat sheet, but as a tool to actually unlock your own creativity, I would really appreciate it if you could share this podcast with your friends. It's available on all your favorite streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple, Amazon. The videos are also available on YouTube, or you can find everything that I'll be doing, including the edited photos that I'll be doing from this week's homework, on my website, easytochris.com. If you guys really want to support the show, if you liked or subscribed in any of those platforms, I would really appreciate it. It helps boost this out into more communities, and that way I can just keep making this a little bit more of a sustainable effort. But in the meantime, thank you guys so much for your time, and until next time, be well.
Thanks for having me, Chris. And thanks to everyone listening. You just watched someone learn the fundamentals of their own craft by actually thinking through it instead of memorizing a manual. That's what this series is about. See you next week.